Can you talk about 40-year certification and sort of what that is and how that could maybe impact the condos that you as a regular buyer should be looking at or not looking at?
Sure. So I tell people when they say, hey, I want to buy a condominium, can you represent me in this? I say, well, first let's look at where is the building in its life cycle?
Right.
Is this pre-construction where we're negotiating a pre-construction purchase agreement and you need to be in by a certain time and we don't know when the developer is going to deliver the building and is your money locked up and for how long? Has the building already been turned over from the developer? So now it's a unit owner controlled building, but you might be going through what's called Florida Statute Chapter 558, the 558 process, the turnover. And we don't know the extent of construction defects in the building. And if you're going to be tied up in a big lawsuit as kind of like the new unit owner controlled board. And then I would say you have kind of the 10 to 20-year-old buildings where you're past construction, you're past turnover, but now you've had at least a decade or more of unit owner control. And it's like, okay, where are you at with your life cycle? Like, are you coming up on kind of that first wave of waterproofing and stucco projects and have those started or are they coming up? And then, like you said, you have this next group where they're coming up on these major recertifications. These are very expensive projects. Yeah. These are projects that for a high rise, they can usually cost, if they haven't been doing the work in a major way leading up to it, it can usually be 10, 20, 30, $40 million projects the association's taking on.
That is wild. So, and then that first major milestone CapEx project is the 40-year CER, not a 30, not a 20.
Yeah, so some have been reduced down to 30. Mm-hmm. And then I still think that there's an informal one, like not regulated by law. But I think in the 10 to 20-year-old buildings, you see a lot of the same things, like major stucco projects. Mm-hmm. You see, is the amenity deck of our parking garage, is that leaking into the structure? Mm-hmm. Is the waterproofing already past its useful life?
But those aren't typically 40 million, 50 million.
No, but those are still large projects.
Right.
So I was going to say, where is the building in its life cycle? And maybe you find one that's, in a sweet spot where it's done the major project and then it's not coming up on its 30 or 40 year, or it's already past that, or hey, it's brand new and no problem, right? Yeah. That's what they promised at least.
At least that's what they promised. So basically, we're in 2024, a 40-year cert of a building in 1984, right? That's a George Orwell book there, but 1984. So if I'm looking at a building that was built in 1984, that building this year has to be going through its 40-year cert.
Yeah, there's obviously some extensions and things that you can do, but yeah, they have that deadline, and unless they get extensions, they need to be going through their 40-year certification and getting re-inspected and passing on these major systems.
So would you, if you're looking at condos, would you say, all right, I'm not going to look at condos that are close to that 1984 built building, or I'm going to scrutinize those?
I would scrutinize it more, because I've had some that I've worked with that even before the Surfside tragedy and before the new laws, they already had their eye on the ball. They were already doing their stucco project. They were already doing electrical cooling towers. They were doing the hard work to get where they needed to be right before their 40 years, so they weren't jammed on doing it. And people complain to say, oh, another special assessment. But now they're looking back and they're not passing a $20 million assessment. They're not passing a $30 million assessment. Yes, do they have a bunch of multi-million dollar assessments along the way?
Right.
But, if you just start looking in proportions and numbers on a spreadsheet, it's no different than taking care of a house. The house, you're going to have to redo the roof. You're going to have to eventually replace the AC, eventually do the windows and these kind of things. So people kind of get this notion that there's a landlord almost or something in the condominium building, but
it's a magical person.
Really, they really do sometimes.
Yeah, I just got to take care of my unit here and everything
the property management company. Why aren't they maintaining the building?
Yeah,
but it costs money to maintain the building, and it takes action by the association.
Right. So I'm looking for $1 million condo, right? And I'm going to put $200,000 down, or a 20% down payment. I feel like people's first step is sort of location.
Sure.
Do I want to live in South Beach, Bay Harbor Islands, Edgewater, Coconut Grove, Brickell, whatever it may be, right? After they get through that point, right? Let's say they choose Brickell, they want to live in Brickell. At what point, right, I go, okay, I want to live in Brickell. I have all these buildings that that have $1 million units I could afford. How do I think about which ones are managed well, which ones have good reserves?
Sure. So you got to do your homework. So people a lot of times say, well, now with the internet and all these apps and these websites, like, what do I need a realtor for?
Right.
Well, a lot of times realtors will specialize in a neighborhood, and some will even specialize in a building. And a lot of times they even live there. So that's one thing that it's kind of like a niche that I find very interesting and I've utilized over the years, is looking for people that already live in the building, and then you really want to do your homework. And I tell people to build it into your contract. So the seller, they're in called what's contractual privity with the association. They're a member of the association, they have certain rights. The member basically the seller has all the rights to the main documents of the condominium association. So to the buyer, I say, hey, don't sign the contract just yet. Let me look at it. Why don't we build out in this contract that the seller, immediately upon signing it, needs to request from the association, which they're allowed to do, and then flip to you. We want to see the budget. We want to see the last reserve study. We want to see the meeting minutes. We want to see what's going on in terms of projects, special assessments, to really do that due diligence. Kind of like a package you'd request if you're like, hey, I'm going to make an investment in a real estate deal. You'd say, okay, I want to see the I want to see the pro forma.
Right.
I want to see the budget. I want to see your underwriting.
Right.
But you got to kind of apply that same mentality.
I'll tell you, I bought a unit in Brickell, call it 3 years ago, and I asked for all those things. They showed me a reserve that had $2.7 million. And I remember looking at it and just being like, feels like a lot of money.
Yeah.
And like, I bought the unit, right? How does one then get all these budgets and reserves and understand what that really means?
Yeah. So one, obviously talking my own book, working with an attorney who's very experienced with this can help you. If you have a very sophisticated realtor as well, that can help. On the reserves, you wanted to know, have they waived the funding of reserves? So this was a big thing sometimes where they said, how can a condominium association not have any money? Well, actually, the law previously even allowed for the unit owners to vote on this. And it had to be in giant font, and it looked ridiculous on the piece of paper that you would get. And you would check this box and say, yes, I consent that we're waiving reserves in the budget or partially funding reserves in the budget. And I understand that there might be a shortfall and it could be specially assessed. So you want to know, have they been fully funding reserves? Have they been partially funding reserves? Or are they not funding reserves at all? Because under the old law, you could waive funding of all of reserves. So you might have a building that's sort of investor controlled. And they say, I want to make my spread. I'm borrowing at this much. My condo fee is this much. I can't change. A lot of times you can't refinance or change what you're paying on the debt. I can kind of, me and my buddies are on the board, and we're going to go to the unit owners, and we're going to propose a budget to the unit owners and say, hey, let's waive reserves. We'll pay for it later on. So that was like a big problem with a lot of buildings. So that's sort of number one, where the 2.6, like, what does that mean? How many units are there? Like, where are they at in the funding? So you want to know, are they fully funding reserves, partially funding reserves, or completely waiving reserves?